Hi, Claire and James here. Just before we get stuck into this week's episode, we wanted to let you know the exciting news that the Midlife Reset audit is now live. This is a first of its kind personalised diagnostic tool designed for midlifers by midlifers.
In just 3 minutes, the audit will help you pinpoint what's really holding you back from living your healthiest, happiest midlife, and most importantly, provide tailored strategies on how to take back control. Midlife doesn't have to be a time of uncertainty. It can be an era of growth, discovery, and well-being. So to go ahead and take the audit, go to themidlifementors.com/audit. Uncertainty. Many of us fear it, and yet it's an unavoidable part of being human. So how can we learn to understand uncertainty a little better and harness the opportunities it brings for self-awareness and growth?
In this week's episode, we're joined by Sam Conniff, award-winning social entrepreneur, author, and the founder of the Uncertainty Experts. We dive deep into the heart of uncertainty, learning from Sam about innovative tools and strategies to help individuals and organisations not just cope with, but thrive in uncertain times. Sam openly shares his personal experience and journey behind developing the Uncertainty Experts and reveals key insights from his research, as well as offering practical advice to navigate the unknown.
So whether you're facing uncertainty in your career, dealing with personal challenges, or simply curious about how to turn unpredictability into opportunity, this episode is for you. Hi, I'm James Davis.
And I'm Claire Davis.
We're the Midlife Mentors, here to lift the lid on how to achieve health and happiness.
The balanced, no-nonsense way.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Midlife Mentors with me, James.
And me, Claire. How is everyone out there? What have we been up to, Mr. D?
Well, actually, since we last recorded a podcast, we've been away to Ibiza for a few days.
We have.
R&R.
Yes, we have.
And no, before anyone asked, we weren't hitting the clubs or anything like that. It was purely
when everyone knows we don't hit
early
the clubs
nights, getting up at sunrise to swim in the sea as the sun came up and just relaxing. It was lovely.
Although it was quite funny because every time that James and I were getting up to watch the sunrise, to go for a sunrise swim, all the people were coming out the clubs absolutely off their faces still and wondering what the hell we were doing, like freaks getting up early to go for a sunrise swim. But other than that, it was lovely. But the sun was out there. It's not so much here, but I'm not going to talk about that.
And we've got exciting stuff coming up. We've decided, like a lot of you have been asking about burnout, so we're going to run a burnout workshop probably imminently around this podcast. We'll drop details and notes in here, but if you're interested in that, just reach out to us, team at the Midlife Mentors. Anyway, today we're going to be talking about a big topic,
yes,
and one that fascinates me, which is uncertainty. So we're joined by a great guest, Sam Conniff of Uncertainty Experts. Welcome, Sam.
Hello, Sam.
Hello, James. Hello, Claire. Thank you very much for having me.
Oh, well, thank you for being here. We're really excited to talk to you about this. This is going to really resonate with lots of people.
Well, I think I can join some dots between all the topics you just mentioned are favourites of mine. Sunset swims, dancing all night, avoiding burnout and uncertainty. And somehow I think they can all be linked together.
I think they can. So Sam, tell us, what inspired you to create Uncertainty Experts and what's the core concept behind it? What is it?
So I'll work backwards through those. So the core concept, it is a interactive documentary. It's a 3-part documentary. We got backing from Netflix to make it. And whilst it's not on Netflix, they invested in us, helped us shape and showed us how to make the best story we could. And by watching the 3 episodes, audiences increase their tolerance to uncertainty against a valid psychological scale. It outperforms some types of online CBT, and it has a very similar effect. It's proven, and then when I say proven, it's been scientifically researched, it's been published and peer-reviewed. It's proven to increase drivers of creativity whilst reducing drivers of anxiety. It helps people with risk-taking, decision-making, problem-solving. Because behind the scenes of all of us, uncertainty is something that we all try to avoid. But at the same time, if you look back through your life, uncertainty has a capacity to bring out the very best of us. And so watching the show, you learn some stories, you learn some scientific tools, you're asked to do some reflecting, and you walk away as if you've had a specialist coaching session in tolerating, navigating, and transforming uncertainty.
I love this, Sam.
Fantastic.
Why did you do this? What's the story behind it?
Some fairly hardcore uncertainty.
Yes. Amazing
Yeah,
life experience.
I was. Yes, yeah, it was. If we could just get into it, warts and all, I'd come away from a business I'd run for nearly 15 years that had defined me, a social enterprise called Liberty that did amazing work helping tens of thousands of young people find opportunities in life. And the sadness and the kind of gap that left in my life, I hadn't fully got my head around. But I didn't completely believe in the world that I was then part of, the kind of innovation and leadership and social sector. I suppose I passionately believed in it, but I'd slightly lost faith in its ability to fix the gaps in society that we needed. I'd also said that I would step away from this very youth-orientated industry that I'd started in my mid-20s when I got old. And in the old days, I'd said that would be when I was 40, not knowing what 40 would feel like. And I set out to write a book about change and about how we do things differently. And the book took me by surprise, became a bestseller, introduced me to a new world of professional speaking. And that was gratefully received because personally, I was going through the biggest turmoil of my life. I was getting divorced, and I've got two little girls who are on half term, and you may well see bang around in the background. And it was this really weird paradox. On stage, best-selling author, traveling the world, success. Internally, I felt like the biggest failure and filled with shame and guilt and confusion. So these two states really didn't sit very well together. And just as me and my ex were kind of getting some balance together, and I felt very lucky, like the world of professional speaking and books can be quite well paid. So we settled on an all right arrangement as we both kind of settled into solo parenting, or co-parenting really, half and half with these two lovely kids. The pandemic came along, and so what I was reliant on, travel and events, came a cropper. And this very high now burn rate of a world that kind of was able to support two worlds as my ex got up on her feet, came crashing down. And it just took months to burn through everything. And I was applying for insolvency and jobs. And I've never had to do either one of those things. And so I felt like a hypocrite because here I'd been, right, for 15 years advocating change and the benefits of change. And actually this level of change came knocking on my door and kicking its way in my house. And I wasn't ready for it. I really nearly I was somewhere in between the 2-for-1 wine deal in Tesco's and some lottery tickets. It was, and so looking at leadership at the time and looking for examples of people who were good in that kind of uncertainty, there was none on display. The Cabinet Office in 2020 was made up of 3 career paths, I read: finance, law and media, and very little experience of true uncertainty. And so I started to look to other dimensions of leadership, and I started to interview people who'd been refugees who are now CEOs, or people who'd been prisoners of war who are now advising politicians, or people who'd been through the justice system or gender transition, smugglers who are now specialists, gang leaders who are now business leaders. And I found a very consistent set of patterns in how to transform uncertainty from a group of people whose society and our natural prejudices mean that we typically tend to overlook or misunderstand. And actually, they had profoundly useful, accessible and valuable tools for navigating uncertainty. And I kind of fell in love with their stories, and I found the inspiration that I needed, and I found the practical toolkits that I needed as well.
Wow. I love that story. Not a pleasant story for you and some of the personal stuff that went on there, but it really resonates with us because, like you, we were flying. Our business was actually running retreats. We were running multiple retreats a year in Spain, and we were 85% booked for 2020, and then bang. So we pivoted to online. We looked at what do we love doing? We started coaching and all the rest of it. So I'm really glad you mentioned COVID actually, because I think it was a big wake up call for a lot of people in terms of you're right. We have this, our subconscious craves certainty, doesn't it? We love the idea that life's going to be the same every day, that there's routine. And I think what COVID did was rip that veil aside. People suddenly oh no, everything I believed in was certain is kind of now uncertain. Do you think on the whole that's been a positive or a negative?
Oh, it's a good question. And you make two good points. I'd like to come back to the notion about our subconscious relationship with seeking certainty when there is none. It's such a hard thing to say whether it's been a good thing, because subjectively that everyone had their own experiences. And if you fell between the gaps like you and I, it sounds like did, and weren't available for any furlough, I'm still paying off. I've got, debt in triple figures. And the psychological impact of debt in midlife is something, once I'm through this, I'd like to do some work on to help others with, because I had no idea of the
we hear you.
We're the same. Got no
sensation
support.
Okay. Then that's something to discuss. So I'm not yet ready to actually be grateful for it, but I do know that I'm going to look back in this life, and there are things that happened that wouldn't have happened without that. And I see this in my work with uncertainty. The old the saying in life's rich school of war, whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger. We know that to be true. I think we'd all agree that, looking backwards in our life, retrospectively, we'll accept that's the case. But proactively looking forwards, I'm still not ready to go, oh, look, yeah, here comes a fucking massive shit show. Great, can't wait for it to make me stronger. You're like, no thanks. So, yes, I think I will come to terms that I wouldn't have started the Uncertainty Experts, and through the Uncertainty Experts, I found, I think, the love of my life. I've become a scientist. It's opened doors that I wouldn't have dreamed of. Perhaps I was also getting a little bit comfortable in this new world that I'd entered into. And even divorce, I'm proud of how we handled that. I'm proud of where we are now with the kids. And probably, horrible as it is, debt is going to be the thing that teaches me to sort out my finances. If you can arrive in the place where all of these things become the lesson that you needed, there is strength in that. But I don't want to say that in any way that patronizes anyone who's right in the middle of it, because I know how hard that is at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what you're saying there, Sam, so resonates with us. Like, what happened to us is we ended up making a choice, at least we had a choice to leave Spain, which is where our business was, and then move back to London when COVID hit. But we were living in a studio flat. Like, that's all we could afford. That's all we could do. And we had no help from the government. We ran out of money, So it's, and again, we're going through that phase right now where we're definitely, what you're saying, honestly, completely resonates on such a deep level about finances and debt and all that kind of stuff. It does force you to take a long, hard look at things. And whether you're looking back at that going, okay, I can get that. It wasn't nice, but I get what was going on there, or whether you're not there yet. I don't think we're there yet either, to be quite honest with you, because it was a massive, massive fuck up for us too. But we're really grateful for you sharing that, actually, because I think the more people that can talk about stuff like this in a real authentic way is really important. So I just wanted to say thank you for being super honest and open there.
Well, that's all right. From what from your initial invitation and then looking up what you're doing, I think the conversation that you've opened the door to is really important. And I think these are supposed to be our best years, aren't they? Like, this is supposed to be when we earn the most and when we know the most, and the mistakes we made of our younger years have all, we paid the price for them, and yet we're not done. And I read recently that the happiness curve has inverted, and actually statistically this is the least happy point of life, because it doesn't have the carefree freedoms of youth, although now they're facing their own epidemic of anxiety, and we haven't reached the latter point. And so I think that's true. I do a lot. The Uncertainty Experts has been picked up by a lot of leadership teams, and whilst I'm trying to work out really how to commercialize it, there's this sense, right, of leaders in their midlife, and I've done lots of work in and around leadership. I don't think it's ever been, and when I say leadership, I don't just mean the head of a company. I don't mean the job that you get. I mean the position that you earn. And leadership can be parenting, and it can be friendship, and it can be marriage. It's the small L leadership that happens inside you, the decision that you make to actually do something about the mess you're in today. And I don't think there's been a harder time. I think it's the most exposed, vulnerable, pressure. I think the world that we were promised, we've arrived in the jobs that we thought we'd applied for, and there's not the power, there's not the pay, there's not the fucking privileges, like all of the stuff that we were expecting isn't there. And we're under more pressure. The kids are, the stuff the kids are going through is not what we expected. The stuff our parents are going through, we didn't expect we'd have that much. And it's a very difficult age to live through. And we're not we're not that well versed emotionally to really connect on it. That's still relatively new language. And our coping strategies, and I think I observe this in men particularly, our coping strategies is one of isolation. And in times of uncertainty, there is a tendency to isolate further. That sense when the stress kicks in, that the feeling is, I'm better off doing this on my own. That's not solely a masculine trait, but it's definitely exacerbated in times of uncertainty. And sadly, it's the exact opposite of the truth, or very often what we need.
I'm so glad you made that point. I mean, one of my passions is helping men better understand what's going on for them at midlife and encourage them to have that vulnerability to open up. Because you're right, I think we're socially conditioned just to keep it in. And I think the suicide statistics for midlife males are so horrific. It's the highest suicide cohort of men and women of any age group speak for themselves. So it's a really important conversation to have, I think, for anyone at any age, but particularly for men at midlife. Because I think it's this whole thing of, the man, the provider. We thought when we got here, we'd be king of our castle. And actually, it's just not like that. Most people are struggling to hold it together. Or if we are where we thought we would be, it's not what we wanted at all. So it's a really, really valid conversation.
Yeah, well, I'm not surprised you're looking and working on that as well. It's because once you've seen it for what it is, it's incredibly potent and powerful. And yeah, the conditioning makes it sound like we were brainwashed, right? But like how we grew up, the narrative was always and still is, and you see it around you. And if you see any small kids, you see that the conditioning is still there. Like it's just so hard to break from. And so then when you start to challenge that, you have to arrive at a degree of dissonance yourself. Like it has everything that I've been told, no longer correct. And particularly as we try hard to step towards or understand or create our own interpretation of what allyship means or equality means. And then, you also have to come to terms with the fact that things aren't equal. And so what's your role in all of that? And it connects to some very difficult and dark places, from violence against women to the statistics that we understand to the, how hard it is to then stand up and have that as a conversation. So, yeah, I think when you become aware of some of these things, there's a choice, isn't there? You can step away from them or step towards them, but the stepping towards them is going to be more difficult, which takes us back to life's rich school of war. And that's, we're now jumping backwards, but your other point was around the subconscious relationship with uncertainty. There are really two states in the human psyche ever, and one is attract and one is avoid. And so we're either moving towards things or away from things. And our tendency is to move away from more things than to move towards them. And that's known as our negativity bias. And I only learned about that in our uncertainty work. And humans are prone to negativity on a ratio of about 8-2. So for every 10 opportunities, indications, invitations, notifications, whatever the modern equivalent might be, evolutionary basis, we'd move away from 8 of them and move towards 2 of them. And that's how we've survived so long. But when you put that in the modern condition, like it makes life pretty hard. And around 2020, behavioral psychologists estimated that negativity bias had risen to about 1 in 200. So, we're on such a heightened state of alert. And it begins to explain, how many people have become more isolated, more socially anxious, more risk averse, more stuck to their screens, less likely to start the things and follow the dreams. And it's a conditioning again. And yet the irony is there is no better state for making the brain more malleable, for making us, uncertainty is one of the most optimum states for humans to learn in, because when you are in high arousal, your sense of smell increases, all of your capacities increase, you become more alert and more aware. So there's this ironic thing. Uncertainty is really good for us. It helps us expand what's possible, pushes us outside of our comfort zone, yet we do all we can to move away from it. And just at the moment that we should be reaching for the new, our tendency is to reach backwards for the known.
Yeah. It's
so fascinating, isn't it? It's so fascinating that the human mind, like you say, from an evolutionary perspective, it's got us to where we are. But actually in the modern world, it's more working against us often than it is for us. In the work you've done, what are some of the tools or techniques people could employ to help them overcome that and perhaps embrace uncertainty more and see the positives of it?
Great question. So this amazing thing happened. I'd done about 9 of these interviews, and I was worried that I risked false inspiration. I've got this incredibly eloquent young man who used to run gangs and is now helping people out of gangs and runs a business incubator, this remarkable ex-smuggler giving brilliant advice for overcoming imposter syndrome. This young woman who given a 20-year prison sentence and is now changing laws and saving lives and teaching people emotional regulation techniques. And so I'm on thin ice, right? Is this morally acceptable? Like, would these remarkable people have been remarkable anyway? And so I was looking for someone to help me understand the science behind it, to give it some validity. And I got introduced to this specialist laboratory called the Decision Making in Uncertainty Centre. And they're part of the neuroscience team, brain science department at University College London. And they, since the financial collapse, have been looking at how individuals and organisations make better decisions in uncertainty. And so they gave me some of their frameworks. And we assessed them against the interviews that I'd done. And they matched up exactly. Exactly. So whether it was my ex-smuggler or the person who'd been through gender transition or my ex-refugees, they were describing these techniques in their own beautiful, prosaic way, but they mapped over these scientific concepts. So when we pulled these two things together and got the backing from Netflix, the documentary introduces you to these remarkable characters. And then once you've met them, you meet the scientists who explain what's going on behind the scenes. And so, yes, there are three kind of sets of tools that we give away, and they follow a structure. And the headlines of that structure, and you try this out, anyone listening or you guys, if you're thinking about uncertainty or you meet someone dealing with uncertainty and they're having a hard time, if you ask people what they think about uncertainty, they will usually give you a balanced response. A bit like we've discussed, it can be a pain in the neck, but it can also be a point of possibility. If you ask them how uncertainty makes them feel, you get a very different answer. Normally about 90% of the things people say, it makes me anxious, scared, indecisive, a bit fretful, feel a bit stuck. And this begins to demonstrate how we need to approach uncertainty. It's called psychobiological. It's a psychobiological issue. It's something that our brains, the novelty that our brains crave, uncertainty triggers. But uncertainty affects us on a chemical, biological, and a personal and emotional basis because it's treated as a threat response. So one of the big mistakes lots of the existing frameworks around uncertainty make is to treat it as risk or probability or a cognitive problem to solve. We as human beings feel uncertainty and we feel it deeply. And so you have to learn to both think and feel your way through it. And that's the kind of the headline response that both the DMU had arrived at. This is both an emotional and an intellectual challenge. And if you try and address it with just one, it will falter. And then, so we've asked this now. We've had over 20,000 participants go through it. It's the world's largest ever study into the human impacts of uncertainty. And when we asked this second question, how does uncertainty make you feel? We've had thousands of individual adjectives describe emotions, but they all cluster into three categories. And the first and the biggest is words like it makes me scared, anxious, sleepless, fretful. So we call that fear. The second is it makes me confused and decisive, feel a bit circular, foggy. We call that fog. And the third is the hardest to articulate, but this is the burnout point you started with. It just makes me stuck. I've lost my mojo. I feel meh. Don't know what to do. So we call that stasis. So fear, fog, and stasis, or FFS, is our acronym we're very proud to have identified, is a true indication of the hard to articulate, or possibly hard to admit, emotional experience of uncertainty. There's lots out there that talks about the thoughtful intellectual problem that it is. But if you're going through it for whatever reasons and you're feeling any of those resonate, those are hard states to move out of. So to answer your question about tools, in the first episode, which focuses around fear, we teach the fact that fear isn't a bad thing. Ultimately, on an evolutionary basis, James, that you took us back to, fear was there to protect us. So we teach tools about emotional regulation. How do you bring your body back into homeostasis when it's kicked into fight or flight? How do you activate rest and digest? In the second one, we teach tools largely around meta-awareness, which is our ability to think about our own thoughts, our ability to identify our own thought processes and regulate those so that we don't experience the fogginess, which is because the brain goes into overdrive or starts worrying about worry. And we know what that feels like, worry loops. And so we teach these tools of metacognition and meta-awareness, which enable us to think our way through, and it makes the brain more agile and adaptive. And in the third one, stasis, we teach tools around intuition, or to give it a scientific term, embodied cognition. And that's how to, the big piece of work around this is somatic marker theory, which just means somatic being body, marker, the signals, So how do you interpret the signals in your body? Because they can become really reliable. When the brain shuts down because it's scared, you can really rely on your body in times of uncertainty. So we bring people through fear, fog and stasis with tools of emotional regulation, metacognition, and embodied cognition or interoception. So it's been bloody fascinating. I mean, I feel like I've had a mini PhD in this whole thing over the last 2 years.
I'm just sitting here like, oh my goodness, this is blowing my mind because it's so, well, I can really feel what you're saying in my own life. When you're saying about in those times of uncertainty, we're even going through that now in our business where it's evolving, it's changing. We don't know necessarily exactly where we want to take it next. There is uncertainty in our life right now, and like it's such a feeling. I can understand. Kind of with the work I do, I'm like, okay, yeah, I know that I'm feeling fear and thinking fearful thoughts, but like just when you're saying about like, yeah, how you can have that balanced approach, like we said, oh yeah, it's a great thing, it's an opportunity, we're going to grow from it.
Yeah.
But then how does it feel in my body? Well, and I experienced burnout last year, so I'd kind of gone to that point last year where we had been, because of the business and the changes we had to go through and the fight and the striving, I just totally burnt out. And so I went into that place that you talked about there, which is shutdown, where it's everything just, you're inert. You become completely inert.
Yes.
Motivation is like non-existent and numb. Like you can't actually, it's almost like when feelings go and you're just there and you're like, holy shit. Like I can't feel anything. I can't do anything. And actually, here's the reality. I don't want to. Like, I don't want to.
Yes.
So everything you've just said it's touching me, and I know for you as well because you experienced it with me. It's like really personal, on a really, really personal level.
So there's a lot of things in there that I've picked up over this, so there's these two parts of the brain, and we're kind of talking about it. So I'll just say what I've learned because it's helped me. The ancient part of our brain in the background there, the amygdala regional, is given lots of different names, the lizard brain and stuff, but it's where the deep emotions sit, like fear. And this latter part, the thing that separates us from previous incarnations of human beings, is the prefrontal cortex, which is like the problem-solving bit. And they have really good dialogue between them, and that's how fear turns into a really thoughtful plan. And they work really well together. But when dissonance has taken place, when two conflicting ideas that no longer make sense, which is what lots of us experienced during the last couple of years, it's just it doesn't add up. What I was predicting hasn't happened, and the brain exists on predictions. And when the prediction doesn't take place, you get a nasty shot of chemicals, which is how we learn. So, oh dear, what I was predicting didn't happen. Now I won't predict that again. So the predictive brain. So when they stop communicating with each other, when fear fires and doesn't have a place to then turn it into a plan, that's where we just lose our mojo. And that's just, it's just stopped. It's like the translation has stopped taking place between the basic part and then the more evolved part that turns it into a way forward. And that mojo feeling, that meh feeling, it fucking sucks because it is in your brain and it is in your body. And that's why these tools, I think I was like, before this work, the least embodied person ever. In fact, that word I just used to slightly recoil at. I think, to quote Ken Robinson, my body was just a brain. My body was just a vehicle to get my brain to the next meeting. And now through this work, so here's something. I mean, it sounds to me from what you've just described there, Claire, that you are, very intuitive and aware of the feelings in your body. Something that I learned in this that's really struck me is that the human brain doesn't really deal with abstract concepts like time, for example. So if you were to describe to me a really happy or sad event of the last few years, your body would pick up similar emotions. They might not be as acute, but you'd feel the emotions.
Yes.
Likewise, if you use the same degree of sophisticated capacity for inhabiting in a different emotional state, or if you had a dream, you can go into the future about some of the dilemmas that you're facing, and you can synthesize them by whatever means that you would do. You could discuss them in depth with James. You could draw them out. You can do pictures, whatever it is that helps you get really close to them emotionally. And those same emotions that trigger your gut instinct are reliable in a future state. So gut instinct takes place in previous states, in present states, and in future states. So if you can inhabit whatever the dilemma is that you're facing next week as close as you possibly can, and then scan your body for those same gut instincts that we're used to only knowing in the moment, like, does this feel right? Is there something here? Or is there something telling me it's not okay? You can bring that gut feeling back to the present moment and align it with whatever data you've got to help you make those decisions. But isn't that amazing? The gut instinct works in a future state if you can get close to inhabiting it.
It's so fascinating.
I mean, yeah. I'm going to say, I think the whole gut and intuition is a really fascinating area that I can, in the last decade, because we used to talk about, trust your gut, and people dismissed it and dismissed intuition. But, now we know that the majority of our neurotransmitters, which are responsible for our mood or cognition, are actually made in the gut, depending on our gut health, which is why, it does have a direct impact on our brain, on our thoughts. And we need to start tuning into that more. I think the problem in modern life is, we are very disembodied, most people. It wasn't that long ago, well, a blink of an eye in evolutionary terms, that we lived very physical lives. We'd have been very aware of what our bodies are doing and our body-mind connection. But obviously in the last 200 years or so, we've become very disconnected from that. Most people have. Because, we sit in a chair, we sit behind screens, we communicate not face-to-face. So I love that you're doing this work, reintroducing this to people and showing them new ways that they can access this and new tools they can go forward with. I think it's really important.
It really is a reintroduction, and as I found these remarkable characters to interview, right? They're fascinating.
They sound amazing.
And the science. They're amazing. Well, if you would like to join us, or if anyone listening would like to join us, we do them as live cohorts, and there's one starting next week. So I will send you both an invitation to join me and come through the program.
Put it in the show notes. Put it in the show notes as well. Brilliant.
Yeah, absolutely. I will give you. Then I'll follow up after this, and we can share it. And in my research, I kept being told, right, the hottest idea in neuroscience right now is the notion of embodied cognition, that we have two brains, as you're pointing on, James. The decision, the neurotransmitters we have in our gut and our brain, and when they work together, or interoception. There's so many of these concepts. But as I was reading around it, I kept being drawn to Buddhism. Because of all the different philosophies, Buddhism has a really clear take on uncertainty. Well, actually, lots of people do. Jesus talks about uncertainty. Einstein talks about uncertainty. Darwin talks about uncertainty. Like the kind of great thinkers or moments or leaders, spiritually or otherwise, in time, have always identified that it has this kind of catalytic proponent to it. But really, the Buddhists seem to nail it first. There's no certainty. There's nothing in life other than death and uncertainty that you can rely on. And I just all my research kept drawing, and I was like, I'll be damned if I'm going to finish this thing on Buddhism. Like, I'm not going to end up with like an inspirational quote at the end of it. But lo and behold, 3 of these episodes, the final interview I do, this incredible guy, he was abandoned before his first birthday by Jamaican parents into a very tough white Middle England 1980s upbringing, where he grew up in Borstal, experienced extreme violence and racism, went to the army to try and escape it, and that was obviously a bad move. And then in his 40s found Zen Buddhism, and now he's like the highest ranked Dharma light carrier in the world. I mean, he's just like my other uncertainty experts. They've experienced these profound moments, and now they're these leading lights in society. And so I couldn't but help end it on Buddhism. And that was my point to him. How did we lose this? This is ancient wisdom. How is it the hottest idea in neuroscience, and yet it's 2,500 years old at the same time? Like, at what point do we let go of these things, and why do we have to keep rediscovering them?
Yeah. Do you know what, Sam? Like, I go, there is so much in my heart that looks at the digital age, and I'm like, well, this is amazing because we're able to do this podcast. Social media has many, many, many benefits, but I can't help thinking, well, and also there's been a lot of research, there's been a lot of talk around, 2007 is when Facebook came out, it's when the smartphone came out, and like the degradation of our attention span and our inability to stay with our emotions. We have something in our hand at the drop of a hat that when we feel uncomfortable, because these emotions are uncomfortable, when we're in uncertainty, it's uncomfortable. We don't want to be there. So what's going to give us a quick dopamine hit and an escapism, and we can avoid, what's going to give us the quickest avoidance, the quickest hit of that dopamine? It's going to be our phones. And yet when we start going through social media, we feel even shittier because everyone's living an amazing life, aren't they? So everyone's highlight reels, we're all looking at, and then we're comparing ourselves and we feel worse about ourselves. And then we haven't got in touch with that embodiment. We haven't. We've just tried to mask it again with something that's incredibly unhealthy for our body and mind.
Yeah. Yeah, I think about this a lot. Particularly, my eldest daughter's 11, and she's very disappointed that I don't think she should have a phone until she's 15 or 16. And this is at odds with it. But I'm pretty sure, because of the amount of work I've done with young people and the research around this, we're in the midst of a moment where we'll look back in time and it'll be like cigarettes or various other things. And so I'm pretty convinced that holding out will be the right thing to do. But I think about it a lot. And I think those exact points that you raise about the technology are absolutely correct. And we all get stuck to it. And we know that feeling. I've got a little charging drawer in my kitchen, so I try and put it away. But for whatever bloody reason, I needed to get my bank PIN code, right? So you picked up the phone and 5 minutes has passed and suddenly you're like down some rabbit hole that you didn't want to be in. 50 minutes has passed. Let's be honest. But I think sitting behind it is two things. And one is attention. And I think that's really the thing that it strips us of. I don't think there's ever been any story of success that I've admired or looked up to or even experienced in my own that wasn't as a result of long periods of attention. And that's really the thing it's stripping me of. I mean, the technology, yes, absolutely. But my ability to sit and focus, I can watch from my own experience, has diminished. And so it's, and there's attention and there's emotional attention, there's connection, there's that part of it. But then I think the other side of it is what you just touched on there, that we're looking to the side again and again. And I don't know many people in our age range. We've kind of lost the sense of elders and wisdom, and you see it in young people. They learn horizontally from one another, and that's good to many degrees. But that means they're all learning from other young people who've no longer, they haven't hit their full evolution of their prefrontal cortex either yet. And because we're not learning in the kind of hierarchical fashion that humans have for their entire journey, we're seeking knowledge that can't be found. We're seeking connection that won't be there yet, or even the unconditional love that comes from a certain type of relationship dynamic. And the more we are learning horizontally or existing horizontally, or that peer and social acceptance only happens horizontally, we're missing a key trick. And I think that might have something to do with our short-term thinking, or our failure to really be thinking long-term. The whole 7-generation thinking seems to underline why so many of our challenges are so pronounced, and yet it's very hard. Yeah. And looking at the current policy announcements of the election that we're in, there's not much long-term thinking on display there either.
No. And now I want another uncertain situation. Let's not dive into that. I'm aware of the time constraint. This has been absolutely fascinating, Sam. We could talk for hours to you.
I really could talk to you for hours and hours and hours, Sam. There's so many more things I want to. Maybe we'll have you on again at some point.
But what are your future plans for Uncertainty Experts, and where can people catch the documentary or connect with you?
So the Uncertainty Experts is evolving. We are working on a book to make it even more accessible and easy to reach and democratized. We are working on a second couple of ideas that use a similar kind of format: unusual characters, interactivity, facilitated reflection, and scientific assessments. We're working one around identity experts, and we're working one around grief and loss. Those seem to be similar, what's known as transdiagnostic issues, great big meaty topics that sit behind a lot of the kind of symptoms that we are used to addressing. But we're also looking at it for young people specifically, where there is this epidemic of anxiety, and we've just seen some of the research results yesterday at how well it performs for young men, particularly where there really is an issue, and kind of the uncertainties and life transitions of young people. So it's a huge project. The trouble is, I haven't worked out the business model, and I'm still trying to dig myself out of the earlier topic of conversation. So it's a great idea. It's got tons of research. It can do huge impact. But how I actually turn it into some kind of meaningful, sustainable business, I'm open to suggestions. But you can find us at uncertaintyexperts.com. It's very easy to find.
Amazing.
That you can buy a ticket anytime, watch it on demand, or 2 or 3 times a year. We do these cohorts that you're very welcome to join us on. And it's a relatively straightforward experience. We do a bit of a kind of webinar to launch it, and then there's these 3 episodes that you watch. You do an assessment before and after, and about 99%. I mean, it's very, very high efficacy rates. Percent of people who go through it see these huge jumps, and our communities are either going through redundancy or divorce, career change.
Yeah, I think we're going to be doing that, Sam.
You're going to be with me next Tuesday. We're going to sort this out.
Yay!
Definitely.
Honestly, we've don't mean to repeat it, but this has been utterly, utterly fascinating. You're speaking our language, really, and some of the stuff that we see with the midlife people that we work with. I know our listeners are going to find this. This is one of those episodes I already know we're going to have loads of emails about going, oh my God, that was amazing. So thank you for sharing your story, your wisdom, and the research that has come out of what you're doing. I think what you're doing, we both think what you're doing is incredibly important and very special. So thank you for spending the time with us.
Yeah, thank you, Sam.
I thought we knew we were going to get on right from that first message you sent me, James. So thank you very much for reaching out. Thank you very much for having me. And I look forward to seeing you on the Uncertainty Experts.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. You've been listening to the Midlife Mentors with Claire and James Davis.
We'd love to hear from you. So drop us a line at info@themidlifementors.com with any questions or topic suggestions.
And make sure you join us on our Facebook page and YouTube channel. You can find us under the Midlife Mentors.
Yeah. What? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode. And don't forget to take the Midlife Reset Audit now to receive personalised insights into what's holding you back from living your healthiest, happiest midlife. So go ahead and take the audit now at themidlifementors.com/audit.